Now, some of you also that maybe watch it online. If you're not watching now, these get recorded. They may watch it down the line. You may not agree with this teaching, but if you don't agree, remember that we don't, during the service, we don't sit there and shake our heads. If you don't agree, you don't agree. It's okay. It's no big deal. We don't throw our hands around or make raspberry. We don't do that. We don't do that. We're civilized people. And remember that if you are wrong, we've actually seen this happen. We had this one guy that used to come here. And every time a new person would come here, he would sit next to the new person, right here in front of me. It was at another congregation, but it was right in front of me at another location. And right after, he turned around and said, so which part did you disagree with? And it's like, why would you do that? Because I could see it on the woman's face. She hadn't disagreed with any of it. She was actually blessed by the teaching. And she said, am I supposed to come up with something? And you can actually steal that person's blessing. If you don't agree, that's fine. We have no problem with that. We're Jews. We're going to disagree. There's an old saying, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. And it's true. So you don't want to rob the blessing of the person, other people, though. So we behave in synagogue. It's not a church. In churches, usually they let you do whatever you want. And I don't care as far as I'm concerned. People say, well, what about women pastors? What about, it's like, I don't know. It's not my religion. It's up to them. I don't care if they ordain babies. It makes no difference to me. That's their deal, not ours. But in synagogue, we act reverently, respectfully. We have youth that attend here. If you can't demonstrate to the kids what respect means here, then where can you? If you can't show your kids how to be respectful, especially with the government the way it is. See, when I was a kid, my parents taught me respect using not only themselves, but also the government. They even used to say, respect the office of the president. You ever hear that when you were a kid? They say, respect the office. You guys...
Still here today.
Huh?
Still here today, too.
Yeah, but today, how can you? That's the problem. They have no way. So who are they going to learn? Who are they going to respect? And if you look at the younger, like the high schoolers and stuff today, you see they just don't have any respect for anything. Even themselves. They don't even have respect for themselves. Anyways, this is a good place to teach your kids. If you badmouth the rabbi or any of the staff here, don't expect your kids to respect you, because generally they won't. We've had that happen here before too. They learn by example. I've seen it happen before, long time ago. These parents were badmouthing me when every time they get in there, there was another person that was with them, and he told me every time they got in their car and drove home, they just unloaded right in front of their kids. Unloaded. Oh, he doesn't know this, wah. And then that kid grew up, and they've had nothing but problems with him. I just heard, like a couple weeks ago, that kid is completely left the faith. He'll have nothing to do with his family, da-da-da. I said, well, that's what you taught him. That's what you taught him. Ancient America. For some, it doesn't even sound right. Jews in ancient America, even ancient America. American history seems to only go back to Columbus for a lot of people. But no matter what this part of the world was called before Columbus, it was already inhabited. We all know that. There was a guy who came online a few days ago and said Columbus doesn't know. People, there was some other guy that was from the islands, and he had come over and discovered America. Didn't say discovered. He said he came and found America, and he's like, and he didn't go back and say he discovered America. He didn't go act like he realized there were people already here. So I wrote back and I said, so did Columbus. He discovered it for the Europeans. That same guy that came over from the islands and found the American style, he went back and said, guess what I discovered? For them. He discovered it for them. Columbus knew there were people here already. He knew it was already inhabited. Yes, there were American Indians here before Columbus. We're going to find some other things out here today. Before Columbus had even thought to sail to this part of the world. But the Americas had people dwelling here even before the American Indians. Okay? The American Indians weren't the first ones here. And just so you know, the American Indians came here via Siberia. That's where they came. I might be covering that in this teaching as well. I don't remember. It's been a while since I've done this. But they came from Siberia, and there are secular scientists who talk about this. They say they found the oldest woman, in their opinion, the oldest woman up in Alaska. She'd been frozen, mummified. And she was clearly Siberian. They said that in the article. She's Siberian. And they believe they came in through Alaska and then went all the way down to South America. Those are the American Indians. Did you know that before the Indians were here, there were also Nordic tribes in the eastern part of the United States? After they had settled Greenland, they began sending expeditions down into what is now called the United States. They even had a name for it. We know the name. It was called Vineland. Vineland. All that red there, that was all settled by the Nordics. They did testing on this. Carbon dating. They were here before. They found cemeteries. This was all before the American Indians were here. They had settled Vineland. This may sound a little bit white supremacist type stuff, but it's not. It's just facts. It's just facts. One may say, well, how do you know so much about American history? You're not from here. I'm not. But my dad was, and he was a history major. He taught history. It's not just him that says this either. This information is also verified from a team of scientists from Stanford University, a liberal school. From Stanford. Stanford is a liberal school, and I'm sure it wasn't easy for them to decry the liberal story of how this land first belonged to the American Indians. That's out of Stanford. Okay, so when you talk to your liberal friends, if you have any left, you can tell this is out of Stanford. Bones have been found of these Nordic travelers as well. And they've been dated to be prior than any other bones found from the American Indians. You can look this stuff up. Does that mean that Nordic tribes discovered America first? No, not necessarily. And that's what we're going to talk about today. After, you guys don't know about the sign of the Son of Man, there's a series we do, which we'll do soon. It answers a lot of questions about some things, but after this time period, what we teach in there is that the Earth, if you look at the majority of all the other planets, they spin like this. Okay? America does, or the world doesn't. It's tilted 23.5 degrees. Okay? In this teaching, we explain how that happened, and it's connected to the flood of Noah. My dad was a scientist, and he explains all this in science. It's great, great stuff. But after that, after the time of Noah, this part, even most of the Christians agree. The Pangea began to separate. It even talks about it in the Bible. It says, when the earth separated. This is in the days of Peleg, P-E-L-E-G. You can look this up in the Bible. That's when most Christians and Jews believe that the Pangea, you guys know what the Pangea is? Began to separate. The Pangea was like, the earth was all one landmass. And if you look at a globe, you can take each of these parts of these major continents, including Australia, and you can put it all together. It's just like a little small jigsaw puzzle. They were all together. And then in the days of Peleg, they began to separate. So just after that, well, I kind of explained it here. This is how it looks. That's the way that it was all one landmass. And it all separated. You can see they all fit together almost perfectly. Almost perfectly. So if you look at a map of the world today, you'll notice that all the continents look like they could all fit together like a puzzle. It looks like that because it did all fit together at one time in history. Now it's separated and they're still separated, by the way. Scientists today, liberal scientists will tell you that it's still separated. It's still moving. It all fit together and it looked like this, and it was called the Pangaea. This would have connected Israel to both South and North America by land. Okay? But why would any Jews, or shall we say proto-Jews, people that became Jews, we actually think it goes back further, but for the sake of argument, why would they even want to travel that far away from Israel, their homeland? Well, Jews have always been a wandering people, for one. We've always been a wandering people. But there's a number of reasons that some of these Jews would have left the area. They could have been banished, for one. They could have committed some kind of crime, and they could, just like the Bible talks about, they could have got kicked out or sent away. They had places called cities of refuge. You can read about that in the Bible as well. And they'd be sent away to where there were other criminals, these cities of refuge. Well, I don't know if you thought about this, but you put a lot of criminals together, sometimes they don't get along either, right? So they could have got kicked out of those cities of refuge and they had to go find their own way. So that's just one way. They could have got kicked out of there too. There are some people that criminals don't even like. Another reason they may have fled was they may have been incorrectly diagnosed as having leprosy or some other kind of disease that scared the main population. They could have said, look, you can't stay here, you have leprosy, you have to go. The Bible does talk about that as well. There were leper colonies. So then they have gone there and then found out, I don't actually have it, I have something else. But they wouldn't let them back in. They may have been in an equivalent of a leper's colony. And after a while, they realized they didn't actually have leprosy, but the common people wouldn't let them back in among the healthy. Even clear down to the time of the Jewish priests. The priests would have been responsible for that call. They could have made a mistake in their diagnosis. I'll say this. I have super dry skin. Super dry skin. Initially, back in biblical days, I would have been classified as a leper. It's not contagious, nothing like that. But because it's a skin issue, and it's so dry that it's white. You remember reading in the Bible, they talk about leprosy, they talk about it being white. It was probably, Hansen's disease. I would have initially been classified as a leper. Initially. There's if you look in the Talmud, I think there was 10 different kinds of skin issues that would have initially been diagnosed as leprosy. So they could have made a wrong diagnosis. People make mistakes. Even if they're godly people, even if they're the people of Hashem. Sometimes we make mistakes. They're still people. So why would they have traveled so far away as to go clear to the Americas? These Jews, like us, are a curious people. They like to see what's out there. That's what Columbus was, a Jew. He wanted to discover new areas or try things that other people hadn't tried. We're a wandering people. I prefer to say we're curious. So could they have traveled clear to the Americas? Absolutely. But wasn't that too far for them to walk? No, especially if you take multiple generations of nomads into consideration. So the first generation only had to go to here. Then the next generation might have went here, and so on, until they did get to the Americas. It's not impossible. It's not even a far reach. The first generation may not have made it that far, maybe even the second generation, but eventually they could get there. Other ancient people groups have traveled just as far. So as of yet, this has all been educated conjecture. Okay? Conjecture means an opinion or a conclusion formed on the basis of incomplete information. It could be a lot of good information, but not 100%. But let's take it to the next step now, and we'll find we are moving far from conjecture and into fact. You may have never heard of the Tennessee Stone. You guys ever heard of it? No, most people haven't. That's what it was called years ago by some. Some now call it the Back Creek Stone. It's the same thing. Potato, it's the same stone. The Back Creek Stone was professionally excavated in 1889 from an undisturbed burial mound in eastern Tennessee by the Smithsonian's Mound Survey Project. This is documented. Documented by the Smithsonian. Okay? When it was first discovered, we did have a little thing. We did a part 2, I think, on the Back Creek Stone not that long ago. When it was first discovered, the director of the project, Cyrus Thomas, initially declared that the inscription which was found on the stone was, quote, beyond question letters of the Cherokee alphabet. That's what he said. You can find this Thomas, 1894, and this is the stone that was found. Okay? Well, I'm sorry, that's not Cherokee. That's Proto-Hebrew. Ancient Hebrew. Some of us call it Paleo-Hebrew. It wasn't properly identified till the 1970s, when a professor of Semitic languages saw the stone and read it in Hebrew, which, and I can verify this, it says, for the Judeans. For the Judeans. This is found in Tennessee. Many, of course, have tried to dispute this find, even calling it a fraud, but their evidence is weak, and the Smithsonian itself has found evidence for that site and surrounding that site that dates back to archaic times. The Smithsonian. So, now we've moved out of conjecture and can reasonably say that the Jews, or if you want to call them proto-Jews, they were at least in Tennessee. At least. Now, when I tell the Mormons this, they get very excited, they're very happy, because they contend that the American Indians are actually Jewish tribes. So they see this as proof that the Book of Mormon is correct. However, the American Indians are not all Jews. There's some, but not all of them. Most of them don't even like falafels. So. Now, is this the only evidence we have? No, it's not. You may not have heard of the Newark Holy Stones. The Newark Holy Stones from Newark. These were a set of stones that were found in the 1860s in Newark, Ohio. This is one of them there. You can clearly see the Hebrew all the way around them. Here's another one, clearly in Hebrew. Clearly. Here's another one, also clearly in Hebrew. Now, this discovery is a bit more controversial than the Back Creek Stone. But if you look at each of the criticisms against it, you'll find that they have some problems in their criticisms. What it comes down to for me is that the man who found these stones, his name was David Wyrick, W-Y-R-I-C-K. His detractors think that he may have forged these stones. Back then in Ohio, you have to realize there wasn't quite the temptation to make these kinds of forgeries. Okay? There wasn't any money in it like there is today. people really didn't care that much about any type of archaeology, especially here in America. Archaeology is a relatively new phenomenon. There wasn't as much to gain from it as you would think one would be able to get from something like that today. Now, Weyrich did make some copies of the text that he had found to send to other people, trying to find out what it meant, but his copies showed that he didn't have the skills to transcribe these letters himself. They were very poorly copied and had many mistakes in them. One of his critics has said that the picture of Moses on the one stone looks as if he was wearing a beret instead of a turban. But I looked at it, and it looks to me like he was wearing a skull cap. A skull cap, which is more likely. The ancient Jews didn't wear turbans. Okay? We know this for a number of reasons. If you go and you look at the Arch of Titus in Rome, I've been there, I've looked at it many, many times. I've shown it to people. They have on this arch, they show, it was like, they made this arch as a memorial of how the Romans had conquered Israel. And it dates to that time. It's from that time. And they show the Jews carrying a menorah. And you can look on their head and you can see what they're wearing. So it wasn't a turban. I mean, I understand why people say turbans, but it's kind of more like a low kind of turban, but with a hat. I have one here somewhere I use as an example. Not that one. But it's more of a skull cap than it is a turban. It's got a little bit of a turban on the inside of it, a little bit, but not enough to call it a turban. Okay? And it looks just like that. Another critic says that it can't be real because Moses looks like he's wearing an 18th century type of dress that I've seen in Egypt when I was in Egypt multiple times on articles taken from the pyramids where they have worn something very similar to what this carving of Moses is wearing. Very similar. I'm not saying it's 100%. With this particular find, but I certainly don't think they can say it's 100% either, going from the opposite opinion. Another attack on this particular stone is that they say that the Hebrew has some discrepancies, but it actually doesn't. It's a particular Paleo-Hebrew, though it's done in a Mishnaic script, and one of the letters that they say doesn't fit the Hebrew is actually the African equivalent of that letter. When the African Jews used Hebrew, they had a slight variation in how they would write it. This happened all throughout different countries that Jews had gone to. You'll see these variations. Just like Teresa and Davidas, her dad, they have some variations when they write in English. Today, it's not exactly the same, and you can kind of match it and say, this is kind of how they understand English coming from Telugu. Her language is Telugu. That's just a natural progression. But it's their equivalent, and in this case, it's unmistakably the equivalent for that letter on this stone. So to me, it makes complete sense. Because it's not surprising that they picked that up along their travel towards this part of the world while they traveled through Africa. It's not a far stretch at all. Is this all the evidence that we have? No. Have you ever heard of the Pittsfield phylactery? Pittsfield phylactery. You can look all these up. The Pittsfield, this is the most compelling to me. I think it's even more compelling than the Bat Creek Stone. The Pittsfield phylactery was found in 1815, buried in a field in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. Say that 3 times fast. Pittsfield, Massachusetts. A man named Joseph Marek was plowing his field when he unearthed a kind of black strap. He threw it in his toolbox and forgot about it for a while. When he came upon it again in his belongings later, he examined it. He cut open one section that was connected to the straps, and he found 4 pieces of folded parchment. When they finally got to someone who could decipher the writing, they found the writing was in ancient Hebrew, and they were quotes from Scripture from Deuteronomy and Exodus. The same verses that are used today in phylacteries. Now, if you don't know what phylacteries are, we call them tefillin. That's the Hebrew word. Phylacteries is actually Greek. They're these straps that we wrap on our arms. And today they have boxes, like a box on it. Well, one day I was talking to my dad about this. And I said, I don't think they made these boxes when they were out in Sinai. They're very intricate. It's all rabbinical. It's very intricate. I said, so my guess is they probably just, because it's a commandment in the Torah to make these phylacteries. My guess is they just took them, put them in a piece of leather, folded it over, and then stitched it. My dad said, okay, well, let's see if there's any information on it. So we actually went online. And we found, I'll show you afterwards, if I don't have pictures of them here. When they were digging at Masada, they found ancient tefillin. And it's exactly the way that I imagined. They have pictures of them, everything. You can look this up. And if you open them, you will find those scriptures folded up and put inside. Rolled, folded, whatever. Really interesting. So we make what we call first century tefillin. I've taken them to the Kotel, the Wailing Wall, where Jews go and pray. I've taken them down there, I've put them on. Jews all around me saw me doing it. And hopefully that'll catch on, because this is the way it was done in ancient times, not these boxes. That's all rabbinic. So phylacteries is a Greek word. So in order for this guy back then, those were only found in Masada recently. Nobody knew what ancient tefillin looked like until these were found. Nobody knew. So there would have had to be quite an extensive amount of knowledge and education involved, mixed with a miracle for this, because the ones that he found were exactly like the ones we found that were found in Masada. There's no way he could have known this. It's impossible. There's no literature about this. Ouch. There's nothing about this. Ancient tefillin have scriptures folded or rolled into them, like our Beta Venu first century tefillin do. Then the Pittsfield tefillin were taken to the Massachusetts Historical Society, where it was logged in that they had them. The records are there. And unfortunately, they lost them. They admit to it. I'm pretty sure it was a Democratic state. So all we have concerning that piece of evidence is the written testimonies. It's logged in their thing, and the written testimonies of various witnesses. But some of those witnesses also included scholars from Harvard who identified it for what it was, from Harvard. Remember that Harvard at one time was a very, very good school. It isn't anymore, but it used to be. Some of the best used to attend Harvard. Is that all the evidence? No. There was also the Los Lunas Decalogue. Los Lunas Decalogue. Okay? I'll show you a picture of it now. This is it. It's also called the Ten Commandments stone, because it has the Ten Commandments written on it in Paleo Hebrew. The first recorded mention of the stone is in 1933, when the late Professor Frank Hibben, an archaeologist from the University of New Mexico, first witnessed it. According to a 1996 interview, Hibben was, quote, convinced the inscription is ancient and thus authentic. Archaeolinguist Cyrus Gordon has proposed that the Los Lunas stone is a Samaritan mezuzah. Our mezuzahs are a tiny scroll like this that we put on our doorposts. Okay? It's small, like this. Usually placed in a container by the entrance to the house or a synagogue and so forth. However, the ancient Samaritan mezuzah, on the other hand, was commonly, to this day, I have friends that are Samaritans. I take our tours to them. They are commonly a large stone slab that's either put on the ground by the gateway to a property or synagogue. Sometimes they'll put them up above the mantle of the doorway when you're walking in. They'll put it right above. You can see them. To this day, you go to Har Gerizim, where the community of the Samaritans live, and sometimes you'll see them up above the doorway. And they bear an abridged version of the Ten Commandments. Either way, it would be remarkable. If it's a Samaritan mezuzah or something else, the fact that it's here is amazing. Now, there are some that think it's fake. There are some people that think that Israel isn't a real country. You're going to have people that deny the Holocaust. You're going to find these people. They're everywhere. So some of them say it's not real. But their reasons aren't strong. The main argument against it is an archaeological context. In other words, they didn't find anything else around it. Just this. Do you want to find context? Yeah, when you can, it's great. But you're not always going to get that. We know this above all from the Mount Zion dig. On Mount Zion, the Muslims went through and dug under the Temple Mount. And they dug under there with bulldozers. They just came through and they're looking for gold. They didn't care about the history, the context, nothing. And they dug it all up and they threw it out on the outside of the old city. So the Mount Zion project, what we do is we go there, and I've been on this dig. We collect the dirt because it's all mixed together because they just dug it up with bulldozers. And then we go through that and we sift through all that, you know. In archaeology, we usually start off with what's called the pit method. So we dig down layer by layer, and that helps us with context, okay? Because each layer you go down, it gets older. You have older and older layers. Because what would happen is that armies would come in, they destroy the city, build their city on top of it, and you'll see layer after layer. They call them strata. So you have layer after layer of these stratas. So at the Mount Zion project, there's like no context, but we still find stuff. And a little bit of context. It's Jerusalem. It's in Israel. But other than that, if I find a dollar bill in the desert of Arabia, I put it in my pocket. Context doesn't matter in some cases. Doesn't mean a thing in that case. Does context strengthen an argument? Oftentimes it does, but it's not the end all. Now, are there other evidences? Yes, but they are not as strong as the ones we've covered so far. So I'll leave those to you in your own research. If you have more questions, we can go over those. So I'll leave that to you. Some of the ones they have out there are obvious fakes. They're obvious fakes. Like the inscribed head and the Cooper stone. After Weyrich's death, Weyrich was the guy who found the stone with the picture of Moses on it. After Weyrich's death, a man named Hone Nicole inscribed his own first and middle initials into the thing. And last name, he wrote it backwards in Hebrew on a rock and tried to pass it off as something ancient. There are times when people will do that. He did it on a rock, claimed it was from antiquity, but he later admitted that he did it in order to try and discredit Weirich's finds. The most ironic and funniest part of that story was that John Nicole's last name in Hebrew means fraudulent. And that's what he unwittingly wrote on his stone. Fraudulent. Can you imagine? Many forgeries are fairly easy to spot if you even know basic Hebrew. So now that we've looked at some examples, we have to address another problem. What do some people do with this information? Well, we already talked about what the Mormons have done with it. The Mormons say that the American Indians are actually Jews. Well, this information to them, of course, they see it as gold. They say it proves that Joseph Smith was truly a prophet, and that he had gone through all these supernatural type things, and he got heard from God about the American Indians, according to him. Most of you may think that only the Mormons believe that kind of nonsense. It's not so. There are other Christian ministries that believe the same thing. They believe that the American Indians are the 10 lost tribes. It's not just a Mormon thing. This is also believed by many Messianics today. They've got caught up in this. So don't be fooled. I can tell you this, whenever someone starts talking about the lost tribes, right, you can bet that they think they found them. It's kind of a buzz phrase. Whenever it starts out with lost tribes, it's kind of a buzz phrase. The Jehovah's Witnesses, they talk about the lost tribes. Lo and behold, they found them, and it's them. According to them, they think they're the 144,000. Not every time, but most times you hear about the so-called lost tribes, a red flag should go up immediately. First, we were talking about this last night, weren't we? First of all, I can guarantee you there are no lost tribes. Hashem even knows the number of hairs on our head. He's never lost a whole Jew, let alone a whole tribe, right? Two house theologians say that Ephraim was lost, and lo and behold, they found them, and it's them, right? Thank goodness, because I was getting worried about where they were. I was afraid maybe Hashem misplaced a few Jews. I was going to call 411 if it wasn't for those two house scholars. Were there Jews in America at one time? Yes, there was. Are they now the American Indians as a whole? No. They probably, however, integrated into various societies in the America, probably also the Nordic in Vineland throughout the centuries. There are very faint, and we're finding this out now, like Stephan pointed out. We're starting to find this out in DNA too. They're finding these traces of Jews in the American Indians. Okay, I'm sure if they start doing some testing on the bones in Vineland in the cemetery, they're going to find some more. Various people groups, not even hardly recognizable today, and would by no means be considered, Jewish. It could be so faint, some of them, so faint that you couldn't say they're Jews, right? Less than 5%. So when did they come here? Probably before the breakup of the Pangaea. Is it possible that they came over on boats at a later date? It's absolutely possible. Not as likely, but of course it's possible. King Solomon did have a fleet of ships. It says in 1 Kings 9:26, King Solomon also built ships at Etzion Geber, which is near Eilat in Edom, on the shore of the Red Sea. So it's not that crazy to think one of those ships could have get caught up in a storm and ended up somewhere. It's not that far-fetched. Now, did he intentionally send ships in this direction? Probably not. Is it possible? Yes, because unlike the rest of humanity, the Jews knew things that the rest of the world did not know. At a time when they thought the world was flat, Columbus knew from the Bible that it was circular. From the Bible. They knew who suspended the world. The pagans had their various myths. One pagan culture thought that the world was carried on the back of an elephant. Isn't that the symbol for the Democrats? I just saw that. That's funny. Even before Columbus set sail, the Jews knew that the world was round. Because it says in Isaiah 40, verse 22, it is he that sits above the what? Circle of the earth. They knew. They knew how the earth was suspended because of Job, where it says in Job 26:7, he stretches out the north over the empty space and hangs the earth over nothing. Okay? So they already knew. And just because Isaiah and Job talked about it in the scriptures doesn't mean that the Jews didn't know about it not reading the scriptures. There's other way. I mean, look at the moon. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the flat Earth people that are going around today, but I mean, it's hard to fathom how they get there. It's just crazy to me. I'm sure Adam knew. And if you didn't believe in some kind of nonsense, you could simply look at the moon and you'd come to the conclusion that the earth can also very well be round. Let's review. 1. There were Nordic tribes here before the American Indians. The Indians killed them and took over their land, fine land. That's how it works. The people with the better guns, the better warriors, the better armies, they conquer a land, they take it over. You know, you can't come back later and say, well, we'd like it back, please. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work. It shouldn't work that way for the American Indians. It shouldn't work that way for the Palestinians. Well, we were here before. Well, actually, we were here before that. Regardless, the guy with the biggest gun wins. That's just how it works. It's always been that way. The ones with the numbers, the best weapons, they win the wars. The Norwegians don't get anything back. They don't get Vineland back. The Vikings, they were Norwegian. 2. Before that, there were Jews here. Speaking for all of Judaism, the non-Jews can have it. You know? Eventually, we're all going to go back to, the Jews are all going to go back to Israel. We're all going to go back to Israel. Eventually. Is there enough evidence to reasonably show a Jewish presence in the Americas? Absolutely there is. 4, if you disagree with me, you should quit Beta Vega. No, don't do that. All the evidences I presented today, are they ironclad? No, there's always room for error on this topic. 6, most likely it was the proto-Jews who came over when there was still a Pangea. 7, are all the American Indians Jews? No. 8, are they any of the lost tribes as a whole? No. 9, because there is controversy on this topic, does that diminish the possible truth of any of it? No. Truth is always truth, no matter if it's disputed. And finally, 10, the Jews knew the earth was round long before anyone else did, before they were aware of that fact. I hope you enjoyed the teaching.